rhetoric doesn't match the reality. The walk doesn't sync up with the talk. And all you have to do is look at the budget that House Republicans put forward just yesterday. It's a budget that doesn't just fail to embrace middle-class economics. It's the opposite of middle-class economics. Doubles down on trickle-down.
Our guest has been in these political trenches before, once representing the 13th Congressional District of New York in the House of Representatives for 6 terms. He had to suffer the slings and arrows of being the only Republican from New York City. Let's welcome former Congressman Vito Fossella to MidPoint today. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. What was your initial take when you saw what the House GOP is putting out in their budget?
I think it's a starting point. I think that Republicans were elected in November in the House and the Senate to govern. The American people spoke. And now it's up to them to demonstrate that they have a large degree of fiscal conservative, if you will, approach to government, a limited one, but within reason. So this is not an unusual process. This is almost like spring training when it comes to baseball. These things happen every year around this time. I think it's in the Republican Party's interest, and then by extension, the American people would benefit, is they prove that they're serious about curtailing spending. They prove that they're serious about implementing and putting in place policies that are pro-growth in nature. And they're serious about basically letting the private sector and the American people strive and to improve on their own. I do think when all is said and done that the Republicans would come together, and then obviously it's up to the president to weigh in and the other party to weigh in to demonstrate to all of us that things are going to be working in Washington. Now, with all that said, the key part in all of this is what comes perhaps in this summer and lately towards the end of the year when they actually spend the money. The budget process is almost saying that you're going to establish a budget for building a home, but within that, you can decide what it looks like, where the money is spent. Perhaps you'll spend more on a kitchen than a bedroom for the sake of argument. But I'm not surprised, and it's not unusual, if you ask me.
Congressman, let's get into some specifics here, if you will, because in the Washington Post this week, the headline was "The House GOP budget is a gimmick." And they noted a couple of things in here, like it claimed to save $5.5 trillion over 10 years, but the fine print asks the Congress and the budget committees only to identify $5 billion in savings over that time. I mean, there's a lot of little things in here, of course, that the Republicans have to answer for. So is this a gimmick or simply just the best they can do?
I've never really put too much stock into these, if you will, resolutions and this budget process. The numbers almost become make-believe. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to how they frame it. As I say, what's most important throughout the whole process is the spending process. And for now, I think while the Republicans have the responsibilities I mentioned at the outset to set forth a blueprint for spending, I do think it's equally important for the Democrats and the presidents to weigh in so that we can solve this fiscal dilemma once and for all.
Well, let's look at that then in a couple of things here. I got about 90 seconds left. We'll take a break, come back, talk a little bit more here. But in the AP report, it talks about the budget having major spending cuts to cut programs like Medicare, Medicaid, health care subsidies, food stamps, and so many others. There are people who are outraged at this. And, of course, they're going to point to the Republicans and say, you don't care about the poor people here around America. How do you then try to get a budget together and still satisfy these people? Or is it simply impossible at this stage of our evolution?
Some of that is just the normal rants and raves that come every year around this process, almost like the movie Groundhog Day. We hear the same thing, we see the same thing over and over, and the important thing is what ultimately they say and they do, not just say. So in part, the budget resolution is just as much as a political document as it is a spending document, so you almost have to ignore what will be invariably a rant and a rave and demonstrate that we're serious about fiscal spending, we're serious about spending taxpayer money wisely, but also recognize that it takes a collaborative effort. We happen to have a president in the White House who could veto any legislation or budget resolution for that matter. So I think for the good of all of us, you take a step back and say what's realistic, what's reasonable, and what's a blueprint that the people can look to, particularly those in Congress, who can say that's something we're proud of. We're not there yet, obviously, because of this normal, grenades from the left.
Well, we've got a lot of grenades in here, and of course, the political climate is something else. I'm out of time in this segment. I want to talk about that. Congressman, if you would, please stand by just a couple of moments, because we'll talk about that political climate coming up next. Also, switch gears a little bit and deal with the fallout of an Israeli election, where it seems to everybody that Benjamin Netanyahu pretty much outfoxed everybody, including the President of the United States. And now the President may be talking about going to the United Nations. That and more when we continue right here on MidPoint. Let's get back to work. Former New York Republican Congressman Vito Fossella joins us. Congressman, let me just take back one last thing about the budget issue before we move on here. The budget proposed by the GOP says they can balance the budget in 10 years. In the political climate that we sit in right now in Washington, D.C., where it seems as if they can't even decide on the actual color of the toilet paper to be used in the washrooms, do you think it's possible to balance a budget in 10 years?
The short answer is no. I don't tend to put too much stock in anything that comes out of Washington, frankly. I think that you can put yourself on, the country should put themselves on a path to balance the budget, and that comes just as much from good fiscal policy with limiting spending, particularly in programs that are obsolete and just a waste. But I do not think that these statements of 5, 10, 15 years will bear fruit. They never have, and they probably never will. I think the best way to do it, frankly, is the party wants to do something very, very serious, and I think there are many people in the party who are serious, is to demonstrate to the American people in the private sector that we can grow the economy, put more people to work, more people, expand the tax base, more businesses to hire more people. That's the best and surest way to grow this economy and balance the budget, if you ask me.
Do you see it as the Democrats being the stonewall here, or the Republicans being at many times petulant children?
Well, I don't know if it's either one. I just think that right now, the American people spoke loud and clear in November. They want to send the country in a different direction when it comes to the fiscal decisions made in Washington, the monetary policies as well. And I think the Republicans would do well if they listened to that and said, we're serious about how we spend taxpayer money. I think the big issue internally in the party is how they balance and reconcile the defense issues, defense appropriations and then spending, with these caps and with the notion that we can only spend a certain amount of money.
How do you do that then?
How do you do that then,
Congressman? How do the fiscal conservatives then basically reach any sort of a compromise with the war hawks in defense?
I think you continue to shine the light on how we spend the money. The more you shine the light, the more you recognize that a lot of this money is wasteful. A lot of this spending is unnecessary. You start with the priority that the defense of this country is number one. That's the thing, the primary responsibility of the federal government. And within those caps, whatever is like any other budget, whether you're in a household or a business, if you don't have the money and something is unnecessary, you get rid of it. That's how the American people respond. That's how American businesses respond and thrive. And when that resonates in Washington will be the day that we can begin to put us on a path to balancing the budget in 5, 7, or 10 years, as the case may be.
A couple of minutes we have left. Let me turn overseas then in the election in Israel, if you will. Benjamin Netanyahu recently said, at least before the election, he said there would be no two-state solution. Today he sort of walked that back a little bit and seemed to kind of take a softer tone that maybe there will be. Is it possible to have this two-state solution, or is this just a pipe dream that simply can't happen with the way the Palestinians run things these days?
I think, credit to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think what he said was today there can't be a two-state solution prior to the election, because under the current regime, under the current mentality, under the current way of thinking, sadly, in many parts of the Middle East, they want to see the destruction of Israel. So how do you expect the people in the state of Israel, who are strongest ally in democracy in the Middle East, to say we're going to hand over the keys without any consolations or conciliation whatsoever? I think what could happen over time is if you can have a two-state solution, if and when the real true leaders in the Middle East step forward, deal honorably with the people in the state of Israel, who won't call for its destruction and its demise, but recognize it as an equal partner in government and equal people as the United States shares with the people of Israel and many others in the Middle East. But until and unless that happens, we have to stand with our strong friend and ally to ensure that they can live with peace and security as we do here.
We have about a minute left here. The word out today is that the White House is considering going to the United Nations and pressuring Israel to make a deal. Is this a last gasp from a president who was outfoxed by Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah, it seems that way. I would hope that for the good of everybody, you take a step back once again, I would hope that the president and the prime minister and other people in the Middle East, and there are many who want peace and stability and security over the long haul, can work things out without continually doing this public barrage, these speeches and this consternation that I think only serves to undermine the process. So I'm not the one to tell the president what to do by any stretch or any means. He's still the commander-in-chief of this country. And he has the right to do that. But I would think a peaceful, quiet resolution is probably the way to go.
Wrong move, though, to go to the United Nations?
I think it's I don't know what he intends to say. I don't want to tell him what to do. I think it's probably an unwise move right now.
It'll be interesting to see how he and Benjamin Netanyahu perhaps even try to mend these fences here as they move forward. Congressman, a pleasure to have you on the show. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to
Take
be care.
With you.
All right, there is one simple thing to do in order to have Muslims around the world turn away from a life of terror. Our next guest believes he has that answer. The question, of course, then begs to be asked, will Muslims around the world be listening? That and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint.